Karen's son dragged my daughter by her hair at school. My sheriff husband arrived with K-9 unit. There are moments in every parent's life when the world stops spinning. When your phone rings during work hours and you see the school's number flash across the screen, your heart immediately knows something is wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for the trembling voice of the school nurse telling me that my 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been involved in an incident. Involved in an incident. Those 3 sanitized words that schools use to avoid saying what really happened. When I arrived at Riverside Elementary, my hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I'd broken every speed limit getting there, my mind racing through possibilities. A scraped knee? A bump on the playground? But the nurse's tone suggested something darker, something she couldn't say over the phone. Nothing prepared me for what I saw when they led me into the nurse's office. My beautiful, vibrant Emma, the little girl who had skipped out the door that morning with her new backpack and bright smile, sat hunched on the examination table. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Her blonde ponytail, the one I'd carefully braided just hours before, was destroyed, hanging in tangled clumps. But it was the raw, angry red marks on her scalp, the patches where hair had been torn out by the roots, that made my knees buckle. "Mrs. Martinez," the nurse began, but I wasn't listening. I was already across the room, gathering my broken daughter into my arms as she finally let out the cry she'd been holding back, a sound no mother should ever have to hear. "Mommy," she whispered against my shoulder, "why did he hurt me? I didn't do anything wrong." That's when I knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The story came out in fragments, broken by Emma's tears and the way she flinched every time someone walked past the nurse's office door. Her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, sat beside us, her own eyes red-rimmed, looking nearly as traumatized as my daughter. It had happened during recess. Emma had been playing hopscotch with her best friend, Lily, near the playground equipment. She was laughing, Mrs. Peterson said, the way 8-year-olds do when they're lost in their own innocent world, completely unaware of danger. That's when Brandon Miller appeared. Brandon was the son of Karen Miller, a name that made several teachers exchange knowing glances when it was mentioned. He was in Emma's grade, but had a reputation that preceded him like a dark cloud. 3 schools in 5 years. Behavioral issues, they called it, multiple incidents that somehow never resulted in real consequences. He just grabbed her. Mrs. Peterson said, her voice breaking. One moment Emma was playing, and the next, Brandon had his hand twisted in her hair. He yanked so hard she fell backward. I felt my whole body tense as Mrs. Peterson continued. The other children had screamed. The playground monitor had been on the other side of the yard. And Brandon, this 10-year-old boy who should have known better, dragged my daughter across the asphalt by her hair like she was a rag doll. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long did this happen before someone stopped him? The silence that followed was damning. Maybe 20 seconds? Mrs. Peterson finally admitted, but it felt like forever. By the time I got there, Emma was screaming and Brandon was standing over her, his hand still in her hair. He was smiling, Mrs. Martinez. I've never seen anything like it. He looked proud. My hands clenched into fists. 20 seconds. 20 seconds of terror for my little girl while this boy enjoyed her pain. 20 seconds that would probably play in her nightmares for years to come. Where is he now? I demanded. In the principal's office with his mother. Of course, Karen Miller had already arrived, already positioned herself between her son and any consequences. I'd seen her type before, the mothers who believed their children could do no wrong, who blamed everyone else, who threw their weight around and threatened lawsuits at the first sign their precious angels might face accountability. "I want to see Principal Davis," I said, standing up, "right now." Emma grabbed my hand, her small fingers digging into my palm. "Mommy, please don't leave me." I looked down at my daughter, at the fear in her blue eyes, the way she trembled, the bald patches on her scalp that would take months to grow back, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about Every time a victim was told to be quiet, to not make waves, to let things go because it was easier for everyone else. I'm not leaving you, baby. I promise, pulling out my phone. I'm calling Daddy. Principal Davis's office smelled like old coffee and desperation. The man himself, 50-something, perpetually exhausted, sat behind his desk with the expression of someone who'd already decided how this was going to play out. Across from him, in the visitors' chairs, sat Brandon and his mother. Karen Miller was exactly what I'd expected, impeccably dressed in designer clothes, arms crossed, face set in an expression of supreme annoyance. Brandon sat beside her, scrolling through a phone she'd obviously given him to keep him quiet. Neither of them looked remotely sorry. Mrs. Martinez, Principal Davis began, standing up as I entered with Emma clinging to my side. Thank you for coming so quickly. I think we can resolve this situation if we all just remain calm and... Remain calm? I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Your student just assaulted my daughter. Dragged her by her hair across the playground. She has bald spots, Principal Davis. Bald spots where this boy ripped her hair out by the roots. Karen Miller let out an exaggerated sigh. Oh, please. Kids will be kids. They were playing, and things got a little rough. No need to be so dramatic. I turned to look at her, really look at her, and saw the complete lack of concern in her eyes. This wasn't ignorance. This was willful dismissal. This was a mother who'd spent years making excuses, who'd moved her son from school to school, rather than address his behavior, who'd learned that if she pushed hard enough, complained loud enough, threatened enough, she could make problems disappear. Playing. I repeated slowly. Your son attacked my daughter. This wasn't play. This was assault. Assault is such a strong word. Principal Davis interjected, trying to smooth things over. Let's not. It's the correct word, I said firmly. And I want to know what you're going to do about it. Brandon finally looked up from his phone, and I saw it, the same smile Mrs. Peterson had described. Not embarrassment, not remorse, satisfaction. This child knew exactly what he'd done, and worse, he knew he'd get away with it. Boys will be boys, Karen said dismissively. Maybe your daughter shouldn't be so sensitive. Brandon said she was being annoying, singing those stupid hopscotch songs too loud. He just wanted her to be quiet. The room went silent. Even Principal Davis looked uncomfortable at this admission. Karen had just confirmed that her son had deliberately hurt Emma, not in the heat of the moment, not by accident, but as a calculated response to normal playground behavior. So, you're admitting your son intentionally hurt my daughter because she annoyed him? I asked carefully. Karen realized her mistake and backtracked quickly. I'm not admitting anything. I'm saying kids have conflicts. They work them out. That's part of growing up. Frankly, I think you're overreacting. A little hair pulling? Please. I pulled plenty of hair when I was in school, and nobody called the police. The police? Principal Davis nearly choked on the word. Mrs. Martinez, surely we don't need to involve law enforcement in a schoolyard dispute. I looked down at Emma, who was pressing herself against my leg, trying to make herself invisible. She was terrified, not just of Brandon, but of this whole situation, of the adults who were minimizing her pain, of the system that was already showing her that her suffering didn't matter as much as avoiding uncomfortable conversations. That's when I made the call. My husband, Detective James Martinez, answered on the second ring. Mi amor, is Emma okay? No, I said clearly, loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. She's not okay. I need you to come to Riverside Elementary right now. Emma was assaulted at school, and the principal is trying to sweep it under the rug. Karen Miller's face went pale. You can't call the police on a child. Watch me, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on hers as I continued speaking to James. Bring documentation paperwork. This needs to be on record. While we waited for James to arrive, I made Emma comfortable in the nurse's office and did what any modern mother would do. I started digging. My phone became a research tool. Within 20 minutes, I'd uncovered a trail of incidents that made my blood run cold. Karen Miller had a social media presence, public Facebook, Instagram, even a mommy blog where she documented her life. And buried in the archives of her digital footprint was a pattern that explained everything. 3 different elementary schools in 5 years. Each time, the posts were the same. Complaints about unreasonable teachers, rants about schools that don't understand special needs, threats of lawsuits against administrators who targeted Brandon. But reading between the lines, the real story emerged. Brandon had bitten a student at his first school, hard enough to break skin. Suspended for 3 days, but Karen had raised such hell that the superintendent got involved, and the suspension was reduced to 1 day. 6 months later, he'd pushed a girl down the stairs. Karen claimed the girl had gotten in his way and threatened to sue the family. They'd moved schools shortly after. The second school, Brandon had destroyed another student's science project the day before it was due. When confronted, he'd thrown a chair at the teacher. Karen's blog post from that time was titled, "When Schools Fail Our Sons: Why Boys Need Room to Express Emotions." They'd moved again. The third school, an incident in the bathroom where Brandon had locked a younger student in a stall and turned off the lights, leaving the terrified 6-year-old screaming for 30 minutes before a janitor heard him. Karen's response? A lengthy Facebook post about boys' rough play being criminalized and how her son was being persecuted for being male. Each time, Karen had used her arsenal of threats, lawsuits, social media campaigns, complaints to district officials to ensure Brandon faced minimal consequences. Each time, some other child had suffered, and some other parent had been told to let it go for the sake of peace. But there was more. I found court records, public information, showing that Karen's ex-husband had sought full custody of Brandon 3 years ago. The case files were sealed, but the final ruling was public, supervised visitation only for Karen with mandatory anger management and parenting classes. Yet somehow, through another legal battle, she'd gotten that reversed. Brandon now lived with her full-time. I was staring at a pattern of enabling, a mother who'd built an entire identity around protecting her son from consequences, and a system that had repeatedly bent to avoid confrontation. The nurse found me with tears streaming down my face, though I wasn't sure if they were from anger or heartbreak. "Mrs. Martinez, your husband just pulled up." I looked out the window and felt something tight in my chest finally release. James's sheriff's department vehicle wasn't alone. Behind him were 2 more patrol cars, and I almost laughed through my tears. A K-9 unit. The German Shepherd was clearly visible through the window, alert and trained. "Oh God," the nurse whispered. He brought backup. Principal Davis appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. "Mrs. Martinez, this is completely unnecessary. Having police cars at the school will frighten the children and—" "You know what frightens children, Principal Davis?" I turned to face him, holding up my phone with the screenshots of Brandon's history. Being assaulted by a classmate and then being told it doesn't matter. Being hurt and having adults minimize their pain. Being victimized and watching their attacker walk away smiling because his mother makes excuses. "I don't know what you think you've found, but—" "I found the truth," I said quietly. Brandon Miller has a documented history of violence spanning 3 schools and 5 years. And every single time, his mother has bullied schools into doing nothing. Well, not this time. James Martinez walked into Riverside Elementary like he owned the place, and in that moment, I'd never been more grateful for his presence. My husband is not an imposing man by nature. He's thoughtful, gentle with Emma, the type who cries at Disney movies. But put him in uniform, add the badge and authority of his position, and he becomes something else entirely, a father on a mission. The K-9 handler, Officer Sarah Chun, walked beside him with her German Shepherd, Rex. The dog wasn't aggressive. He was too well trained for that, but his presence was unmistakable. Something about having a police dog in an elementary school made everything feel suddenly, dramatically real. "Daddy," Emma's voice cracked as she saw him, and within seconds she was in his arms, sobbing against his uniform as he held her tight. I watched my husband's face as he examined our daughter's injuries. The raw scalp, the bruising on her arms where she'd been dragged, the way she flinched when he touched her head. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening that I'd only seen a handful of times in our 15 years together. "Where is he?" James asked quietly. "Principal Davis's office. With his mother." James nodded once, then looked at Officer Chun. "Document everything. Photographs of injuries, statements from witnesses, the whole protocol." "Sir," Principal Davis had followed us, wringing his hands. "Detective Martinez, surely we can handle this internally. There's no need to treat this like a criminal matter. My daughter has visible injuries from an unprovoked attack by another student," James replied, his voice professional but cold. "In any other context, that's assault and battery. The fact that it happened at school doesn't change the nature of the crime." "Crime?" Davis looked like he might faint. "It was a schoolyard incident." "It was assault," James repeated, "and I'm here in my official capacity to ensure it's properly documented. Unless you'd like to explain to the district superintendent and the school board why you attempted to obstruct a police investigation involving violence against a minor." The principal's face went from pale to gray. Karen Miller must have heard the commotion because she appeared in the hallway, Brandon trailing behind her. When she saw the officers, the K-9, the cameras being set up, her confident demeanor cracked. "This is harassment," she shouted. "You can't bring police dogs to intimidate children." "Ma'am." Officer Chin stepped forward, calm and professional. "Rex is here as part of the documentation process. He's not aggressive unless commanded to be, and no child is in any danger from his presence. However, I do need to speak with your son about the incident." "Absolutely not. I know my rights. Brandon is a minor, and you cannot question him without my consent, which I do not give." James turned to her, and I saw something in his eyes that made even Karen Miller take a step back. "Actually, Mrs. Miller, in cases involving violence on school property, we have the authority to conduct preliminary investigations regardless of parental consent. We can do this here with you present, or we can do it at the station. Your choice." The hallway had filled with teachers and staff, all watching this confrontation unfold. Some looked shocked, others relieved, as if they'd been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to Karen Miller. "I'll sue." Karen's voice went shrill. "I'll sue the school, the police department, you personally." "That's your right," James said calmly. "But right now, your son is going to give a statement about what happened on that playground. And depending on what he says, there may be consequences beyond school discipline." Brandon, who had been playing on his phone, finally looked up. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw uncertainty cross his face. The adult who'd shown up wasn't another pushover principal or frightened teacher. This was a man with a badge, with authority that even his mother couldn't wave away. "I want a lawyer," Karen declared. "You're welcome to call one," James replied. "But I'm taking statements from the witnesses first. Mrs. Peterson, you said you saw what happened." The conference room became an impromptu investigation center. James had a gift for getting people to talk, for creating an atmosphere where the truth felt safer than lies. One by one, the witnesses gave their statements. Mrs. Peterson went first, her voice steady now that someone was finally taking the situation seriously. She described watching Brandon approach Emma, seeing the deliberate way he'd grabbed her hair, hearing Emma's screams. "It wasn't rough play," she testified. "It was intentional violence. And when I pulled him off, he was smiling. He said she needed to learn to be quiet." The playground monitor, a young woman named Ashley who'd been on the far side of the yard, gave her statement next. "I heard screaming and ran over. By the time I got there, Mrs. Peterson had already separated them. But I saw Emma's hair all over the ground, clumps of it, and I saw Brandon's face. He wasn't upset or scared like kids usually are after fights. He looked satisfied." Then came the other children's statements. James had a gentle way with kids, kneeling to their level, making them feel safe enough to tell the truth. 3 different 8-year-olds confirmed the same story. Brandon had walked up to Emma while she was playing, grabbed her hair without warning, and dragged her across the asphalt while she screamed and cried. Why did he do it? James asked one of the children, gently. The little boy, whose name was Marcus, looked at his shoes. Brandon's mean. He always hurts people when teachers aren't looking. Last week, he pushed Lily off the swing. The week before, he broke Tommy's glasses. But his mom always comes and yells, so nothing happens. Officer Chun had been taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each statement. Detective Martinez, she said quietly, pulling him aside. This fits the pattern of escalating violent behavior. The previous incidents at other schools, the progression from minor violence to major, this child needs intervention before someone gets seriously hurt. I watched Karen Miller's face as she realized the walls were closing in. Her threats weren't working. Her indignation wasn't swaying anyone. The system that had bent to her will for 5 years was finally pushing back. I want to see my son, she demanded. You can't keep me from him. Brandon is giving his statement now, James replied. You can join us if you'd like, but you cannot interrupt or coach his answers. Do you understand? We all filed back into Principal Davis's office. Brandon sat in a chair, smaller somehow, without his phone, with Officer Chin standing nearby. Rex, the K-9, lay by the door, not threatening, just present. A reminder that this wasn't a game. Brandon, James began, his voice kind but firm. I need you to tell me what happened on the playground today. Tell me in your own words. Brandon glanced at his mother, who nodded tightly. He shrugged. I grabbed Emma's hair. Why? Another shrug. She was being annoying, singing stupid songs. I wanted her to stop. So, you grab her hair? Yeah. Did you know it would hurt her? Brandon hesitated. This was the crucial question, the one that would determine intent. Karen leaned forward, ready to interrupt, but Officer Chin raised a hand in warning. Yeah. Brandon finally admitted, I knew it would hurt. That's why I did it. The room went absolutely silent. Karen Miller's face drained of color. Principal Davis looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. And Brandon, realizing what he'd just admitted, looked at his mother with something close to panic. I want to take it back, he said quickly. I didn't mean that. But it was too late. The truth was out, recorded, witnessed by multiple adults. Brandon Miller had intentionally assaulted Emma, knowing it would cause pain, and had done so as punishment for behavior he found annoying. James closed his notebook. Mrs. Miller, your son will be charged with juvenile assault. Given his age, he'll be processed through the juvenile system, which focuses on rehabilitation. However, this will be on his record, and the family court will likely mandate counseling and possibly anger management programs. You can't do this. Karen stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. He's just a child. He's a child who deliberately hurt another child, James replied. And as his mother, you've had 5 years and 3 schools to address this behavior. Instead, you've enabled it. That ends today. The aftermath of that day rippled through Riverside Elementary like a stone thrown into still water. Brandon Miller was suspended for 2 weeks while the juvenile court processed the assault charge. True to James's word, the focus was on rehabilitation rather than punishment, mandatory counseling sessions, anger management classes, and supervised interactions with peers. But more importantly, Karen Miller was required to attend parenting classes and family therapy sessions. The court had seen through her excuses, her threats, her years of enabling. The day after the incident, Principal Davis called an emergency meeting with all the parents. James and I attended, Emma sitting between us, still scared but no longer alone in her trauma. What Davis said in that meeting surprised me. I owe this community an apology, he began, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. For too long, this administration has prioritized avoiding conflict over ensuring student safety. We've allowed aggressive behavior to go unchecked because addressing it was uncomfortable or legally complicated. But watching Emma Martinez suffer the consequences of our cowardice has shown me that we've failed in our most basic responsibility, protecting our children. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Other parents began sharing their own stories, children who'd been bullied, hurt, threatened, all while the school looked the other way. Brandon hadn't been the only problem. He'd just been the most obvious one. Changes came swiftly. New policies on bullying and assault, mandatory reporting protocols, training for teachers on identifying and addressing violent behavior before it escalated, and perhaps most importantly, a commitment from the district superintendent that no parent would ever again be allowed to bully a school into ignoring violence. Emma's physical injuries healed faster than her emotional ones. The bald spots on her scalp gradually filled in with new hair growth. The bruises faded, but the nightmares lasted for months. She'd wake up screaming, convinced Brandon was standing over her. She refused to go back to school for 3 weeks, clinging to me every time I mentioned it. James and I got her into therapy immediately. Dr. Wilson, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, worked with Emma twice a week. Slowly, painfully slowly, our daughter began to heal. She learned that what happened to her wasn't her fault. That being hurt didn't mean she was weak. That speaking up when you're victimized isn't making trouble, it's survival. 6 months later, Emma agreed to go back to school. Brandon was no longer there. His father had successfully petitioned for full custody and enrolled him in a school with intensive behavioral support programs. According to the grapevine, Karen had moved out of state, though whether that was voluntary or part of custody arrangements, I never learned. The first day back, Emma held my hand so tightly I lost circulation in my fingers. But Mrs. Peterson was waiting at the classroom door, and the moment Emma saw her teacher's warm smile, something in her relaxed. "Welcome back, Emma," Mrs. Peterson said gently. "We've missed you so much. Would you like to see what we've been working on?" Emma nodded, then turned back to me. "Mommy, will you be here when school ends?" "I'll be right here, I promised." First one in the pickup line. I watched her walk into that classroom, my brave girl who'd survived something no child should have to face, and felt the tears come again. But these were different tears. These weren't tears of anger or helplessness. These were tears of pride. That evening, as James and I tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question that had been on my mind for months. "Daddy, why did you bring Rex to school that day?" James sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair, now grown back fully away from her face. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people need to understand that actions have consequences." Brandon's mother had spent a long time teaching him that he could hurt people without facing any real punishment. I needed her to see that wasn't true, that there are people who will stand up for victims, even when it's uncomfortable or difficult. The other kids thought Rex was cool, Emma said quietly. Marcus said it was like having a superhero come to school. "You're the superhero, Mija," I told her. "You were brave enough to tell the truth, even when you were scared. That's the hardest kind of brave there is." Emma thought about this for a moment, then looked at both of us with those big blue eyes that had seen too much, too young. Will Brandon learn to be better? Will he stop hurting people? It was such an Emma question, concerned even for the boy who'd hurt her. James and I exchanged a glance. "I don't know," James answered honestly. "But he's getting help now. Real help. And if he doesn't learn, there will be consequences every time he chooses to hurt someone. That's how it has to work." "Good," Emma said firmly. Then, softer, "I hope he learns. I don't want him to hurt anyone else the way he hurt me." After she fell asleep, James and I sat in the living room, processing everything that had happened. 6 months of trauma, healing, fighting, advocating. 6 months of watching our daughter struggle with nightmares and anxiety. 6 months of wondering if we'd done the right thing by pushing so hard for accountability. "Do you think we did the right thing?" I asked James, voicing the doubt that had plagued me. Bringing in the K-9 unit, documenting everything like a crime scene, some people said we went too far. James took my hand the same way he had on our wedding day 15 years ago. "We taught Emma the most important lesson she'll ever learn. That she matters. That her pain matters. That when someone hurts you, you don't have to be quiet about it. You don't have to protect your attacker's feelings or worry about making things uncomfortable for the adults around you. You have the right to demand justice and safety." "But she's 8 years old," I whispered. "She shouldn't have to learn these lessons yet." No, James agreed. She shouldn't. But since she had to learn them, I'm glad we taught her that the world will fight for her, that her father will bring every resource at his disposal to protect her, that her mother will never back down from defending her. Those are lessons that will serve her for the rest of her life. He was right. Emma had learned something profound that day, not just about standing up for herself, but about the kind of parent, the kind of person she wanted to become. She'd learned that love means fighting even when it's hard. That protection means action, not just words. A year later, I received a message that changed my perspective on everything that had happened. It came through Facebook, a message from a woman named Jennifer whose profile showed she lived 2 states away. The message was long, heartfelt, and devastating. Mrs. Martinez, you don't know me, but I know what happened at your daughter's school last year. My son was Brandon Miller's first victim 5 years ago. Brandon bit him so badly that my son needed stitches and developed a fear of school that lasted for 2 years. When I tried to press charges, Karen Miller threatened to sue us. She said her lawyer would destroy our family, would bankrupt us, would make sure everyone knew we were trying to criminalize childhood behavior. The school encouraged us to drop it. The superintendent suggested we transfer our son to another school to protect him, they said, but really to make the problem go away. We didn't have your resources. My husband isn't a sheriff. We didn't know how to fight back against someone like Karen. So we let it go. We moved our son, got him therapy, and tried to move on. But I've carried guilt about that decision every single day since. When I heard what you did, how you stood up to the school, how your husband documented everything, how you refused to let them sweep it under the rug, I cried. Because you did what I couldn't do. You stopped Brandon before he could do to other children what he did to mine. You ended a pattern that had been going on for 5 years. I reached out to the other families, the other children Brandon hurt at different schools. There were 7 of us total. 7 families who were told to be quiet, to not make waves, to think about Brandon's future. 7 children who were taught that their pain mattered less than avoiding confrontation. Because of what you did, Brandon is getting help. Real help. His father told me that Brandon is in intensive therapy, that he's finally being diagnosed with issues that should have been addressed years ago, that he's learning to manage his anger in healthy ways. More importantly, Karen lost custody. She can't enable him anymore. She can't protect him from consequences anymore. I know there are people who criticized you, who said you went too far. But you saved Brandon's life. You saved him from becoming a teenager, then an adult, who never learned to control his violent impulses. You probably prevented much worse violence down the road. Thank you. Thank you for being the mother I wasn't brave enough to be. Thank you for fighting when I gave up. Thank you for teaching your daughter and my son and all the other victims that their pain matters. I read that message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. I thought our story was about one incident, one attack, one family's fight for justice. But it was so much bigger than that. It was about breaking a cycle. It was about 7 families who'd been silenced, 7 children who'd been hurt, and one mother who finally said no more. The twist wasn't just that Brandon had a history of violence. It wasn't just that the system had failed repeatedly. The twist was that our fight, our decision to bring in every resource we had, our refusal to be quiet, it had rippled backward and forward in time. Backward, giving validation to families who'd been forced into silence. Forward, preventing future violence by ensuring Brandon got the help he needed. I showed the message to James that night. He read it silently, then pulled me close. We did the right thing, he said softly, not just for Emma, for all of them. I wish it hadn't been so hard. I admitted, I wish the system worked the first time for the first family, so we didn't have to become the ones who fought. But since it didn't, James replied, I'm glad we were the ones with the resources to fight. I'm glad we were the ones who refused to let Emma's pain be minimized. Emma, now 9 years old and thriving in 4th grade, overheard us talking. She'd become so much stronger over the past year, so much more confident. She joined the school's peer mediation program, helping other kids work through conflicts. She'd become an advocate for victims, even at her young age. Mom? Dad? She appeared in the doorway of our room, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Was that about Brandon? We didn't hide things from Emma anymore. She'd earned the right to know the truth. Yes, baby, I said. It was from another mom whose son Brandon hurt a long time ago. She wanted to thank us for standing up when she couldn't. Emma thought about this, then nodded seriously. Good. Everyone deserves someone to stand up for them. That's what you taught me. After she went back to bed, James and I stayed up late, talking about the path that had led us here. About the phone call from the school nurse. About my decision to call James. About his decision to bring backup, to make it official, to refuse to let the school minimize what happened. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we just let it go? I asked every day, James admitted, and every day I'm grateful we didn't. Because somewhere out there, there's a 10th kid who never got hurt because Brandon got help. There's a parent who never had to get that phone call from the school nurse. There's a life that was changed because we fought. Now, I ask you, reading this story from wherever you are in the world, what would you have done? Would you have accepted the principal's assurances that it was just a schoolyard incident? Would you have let your anger cool and trusted the system to handle things internally? Would you have worried more about making waves than about your child's pain? Or would you have fought? Would you have called every resource at your disposal? Would you have documented everything, insisted on accountability, refused to let adults minimize your child's trauma for the sake of convenience? Because here's the truth that took me a year to fully understand. This story isn't just about Brandon and Emma. It's about every time a victim is told to be quiet. Every time a parent is encouraged to let it go, every time a system chooses comfort over justice. It's about the choice we all face when someone we love is hurt. Do we protect them by fighting, even when fighting is hard and uncomfortable and makes us unpopular? Or do we protect ourselves by accepting whatever scraps of justice the system offers? Emma once asked me if I would do it all again, knowing how hard it would be. Knowing the criticism we'd face, the stress, the months of fighting. And I told her the truth. I would do it 1,000 times over. Because she is worth fighting for. Because every child is worth fighting for. Your child is worth fighting for. If you're a parent, I'm asking you to make a promise right now. If your child is ever hurt, don't let anyone convince you it doesn't matter. Don't let anyone minimize their pain. Don't let the fear of being that parent stop you from demanding accountability. Share this story. Share it with other parents, with teachers, with administrators. Share it so that the next time a Karen Miller tries to bully a school into protecting her violent child, there's a community ready to say no more. If you're a teacher or administrator, I'm asking you to do better. Don't wait for a parent to bring in a K-9 unit before you take violence seriously. Don't let concern about lawsuits or bad publicity override your duty to protect children. Create systems that prioritize safety over comfort, justice over convenience. If you're someone who's been hurt and told to be quiet, I'm telling you, your pain matters. Your story matters. You deserve advocates who will fight for you even when it's hard. And if you're reading this thinking, this could never happen to my child, I'm begging you, don't be so sure. Because somewhere right now, there's another Brandon in another school and another parent like Karen Miller who's teaching him that consequences don't apply to him. The question isn't whether violence will happen. The question is, will we be brave enough to stop it? Will you? Share the story. Tag a parent who needs to hear it. Comment with your own experiences. Let's start a conversation about protecting our children. Not just from violence, but from systems that minimize their pain. Because every child deserves what Emma got, a parent who fights, a system that listens, and justice that doesn't depend on who their parents know. Every child deserves to be protected. Will you help make that happen?